Starfield is officially here. Those who pre-ordered the game were lucky enough to have a couple of days before the official release to test their pilot gear and make sure that they were ready for the cosmos. I was one of those people, and the question remains, should you buy Starfield? The answer to that question is, well, it depends. This video is going to go through my experiences and first impressions with Starfield. The footage you're seeing in the background will comprise only of the first few hours of the game, so it is relatively spoiler-free. With that said, let's move on to the review. Starfield was touted to be one of the most ambitious RPGs ever. A space epic featuring thousands of galaxies and planets to explore, a dynamic story. It's supposed to be a game of a generation. And to its credit, it kind of is. Starfield is massive. I'm not even touching on their impressive numbers of solar systems and planets to explore. You got your skill trees, ship customization, a typical character customization menu for a Bethesda game, outposts to build, and multiple ways to play. Whether you want to be a space pirate, a smuggler, or just an adventurer of the universe, you can do all of that in Starfield. I have about 25 hours into the game and I have barely scratched the tip of the iceberg. That's how much in-depth Starfield is. Visually, Starfield is a pretty good-looking game, especially if you play on ultra settings. However, the impressive visuals come at a cost of a downgraded and quite unpleasant gameplay experience. Starfield, in my opinion, requires at least 60 FPS to fully enjoy the gameplay. And even with my powerful PC, which has an RTX 2080 Ti, granted an outdated but still powerful card, 64 gigs of memory, and a Ryzen 9 3900X processor, I did not see anything near 60 FPS while on 1440p, even on medium to low graphics. In my opinion, dropping the resolution down to 1080 was almost a necessity, which is quite a shame because I genuinely like the way Starfield looks. Despite Ultra's beauty, I ultimately play on the side of performance, which in my case was a combination of low to medium settings on 1080p. Even in 1080, the environments look great and feel like a lived-in universe. Bethesda put a lot of attention to detail, and I love the interiors of the ships and buildings. I can't say the same thing about their NPCs though. Interacting with Starfield's characters is pretty much equivalent to the NPCs that you would find in other Bethesda RPGs. Nearly cookie cutter. And to be quite honest with you, this is something that I've never liked in Bethesda games. The NPCs almost always have this dead-eye stare to them, almost making it uncomfortable staring deeply into their eyes. Considering how much time a player interacts with NPCs, I was actually hoping that Bethesda could deliver much more visual quality to their faces. Of course, being an RPG, the visual fidelity of faces isn't the most important factor. What truly matters is the narrative storytelling, the many story arcs of characters, and the overall plot. And as for the story of Starfield, it's just okay. I believe that myself, along with other gamers, have been spoiled by how in-depth, rich, and dynamic the storyline of Baldur's Gate 3 really is. The issue with Starfield is simply that it wasn't built up to have such a dynamic storyline, and it ends up falling back on a few default lines and decision making. Which leads me to one of my issues with Starfield, which is the illusion of choice. No matter what your character might suggest, if it isn't what Bethesda intended, you don't get the choice. You don't have a say, and NPCs will say what needs to be said in order to fulfill the main linear campaign. While there are some small details that may be changed from playthrough to playthrough, most of the time, I found myself not caring about these characters or decisions. None of their backstories were riveting enough to make me stay. And I missed a lot of the character development and story interactions that are present in games like Baldur's Gate. One of the better things in Starfield is its combat. Starfield absolutely nailed the feel and sounds of the weapons. The gunplay feels nice and satisfying, and in situations of 0G, certain weapons like shotguns and rifles will actually propel you backwards, which is a really nicely added detail. Ship combat is also something that needs to be addressed. I am not a good pilot fighter, and oftentimes I found myself lost in ship combat. However, thanks to the auto-locking feature of most of the ships, I think all the ships have an auto-locking feature, this was an issue that quickly became resolved. An early mission in Starfield, right after when you meet the starting organization, involves you getting into ship combat, docking at space stations, boarding ships, and even ship stealth. And while it's cool that Starfield offers these features, it's not particularly my style of gaming, and because of that, I ended up spending most of my time with ground combat. The progression system is pretty typical for an RPG. There are many paths you can take, from being a persuasive space adventurer to a filthy gun-toting bandit. Whatever your story is, the skill progression will let you be whoever you want to be. While playing Starfield, I also never really experienced any game-breaking glitches and bugs. While they still exist, they didn't negatively contribute to my gameplay experience. One thing I wish would change would be the enemy AI of the game. Starfield is comically easy. The bots don't target you half of the time, and even when they do, they have the aim of a clone in Star Wars. I don't expect the AI difficulty of games like Tarkov, but especially coming from a AAA game developer like Bethesda, this was an area that I hope to see Bethesda put a little more oomph into. Anytime I play an RPG, whether it be Skyrim, World of Warcraft, even Baldur's Gate, one of the things that I love to do is explore. Starfield's expansive map is not one to be scoffed at. In fact, I'm amazed that Bethesda was able to fit in so much content in a relatively small package when compared to the file size of games like Call of Duty. Despite that though, a lot of Starfield's planets are nearly completely empty, which can make a pretty dull experience. I expected that every planet was going to have some sort of side quest or storyline I could complete, but that just wasn't the case. And for better or for worse, Starfield captures space adventuring pretty true to life. In fact, I read an article by PC Gamer, and it turns out that they made the choice to have some planets be barren wastelands for a reason. Quote, "The point of the vastness of space is you should feel small. Not every planet is supposed to be Disney World. When astronauts went to the moon, there was nothing there. They certainly weren't bored." And while it wouldn't have been my choice to leave planets empty and desolate, the reasoning actually makes a lot of sense to me. And despite the vastness of space though, I ended up just fast traveling everywhere anyways, which makes me feel a little conflicted. As much as I love exploring in video games, Starfield quite literally necessitates this feature because of how big the game world is, which brings a ton of time-saving features, but also takes away part of the exploration and immersion for me. What I can say for myself at least is that at the end of the day, Starfield is another Bethesda game. And if you like games from Bethesda, you should pick it up and give it a shot. What's difficult is that when reviewing games like Starfield, it's not going to be for everybody. If there is something that I can say, it's that it's as if Star Citizen and Fallout had a baby, and the baby's name was Starfield. For me personally, I don't think I'll spend a lot of time on Starfield, at least right now. As an RPG, it's okay, although I prefer the dynamic and ever-changing story of Baldur's Gate. As an FPS, it's also okay. The enemies aren't the toughest, the encounters aren't the most groundbreaking, but they are entertaining enough. And as a space game, it's hard to argue against that this is one of the most feature-packed games out there right now. Will Starfield be Game of the Year? Honestly, I think Baldur's Gate is probably going to secure that spot. If you love games like Star Citizen or other Bethesda games, you're probably going to like this game. Starfield is, at its core, a package that is put together relatively well. Starfield is the ambitious game that I think Todd Howard wanted to make, but at the same time, it feels a little too safe. I truly believe that this game, alongside a lot of the other Bethesda titles, when paired with community-made mods, will probably be one of the biggest Bethesda titles for a while, until Todd Howard decides to release the game for a decade straight and then ends up releasing Elder Scrolls 6. But that's just one man's take on the game, and I want to hear from you. What do you think about Starfield? Will you be buying the game? Or if you have already played the game, how are you enjoying it? Do you disagree? I'd love to see your feedback in the comments below. And while you're there, if you like my content and you would like to see more, I'd more than appreciate you taking your time to subscribe and hitting that notification bell button. With that being said, I'm Jhaluvai, this was Starfield, and I hope you have a great rest of your day.